Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another video. My name is Tom. Thanks for joining me here today. I'm here with the EUV. I'm still trying to come up with a good name for her. A couple of good ones that were recommended was actually, one of them was pretty funny, but the first one was Onyx because it's black. Obsidian was another one, and Kit from Knight Rider. I think I made a reference to Knight Rider a couple of videos back. And, Kit was black. And, with the tech in this car, I can see that. It kind of drives by itself. It'll get you from point A to point B. It's not full-on self-driving, but, and it doesn't talk either. But we'll circle back to that. I got my new license plate in. You can see it right there. I already installed it. Time to shred this one. But the point of this video, I wanted to take a break from the regular content and go over costs. So I guess a question has come up. A question has been asked. How much have I spent so far on the car in 1,000 miles? So I'm going to take you guys upstairs in my office where we can talk about this a little bit more, figure out the math and see if it's accurate. I've never worked out the formulas, so we're going to give it a shot. All right? Let's go. All right, so I brought you guys upstairs into my office. I figured this would be the easiest way to go through and kind of work out some of the math. Now, I'm not a math whiz, so I'm pretty sure that I checked my work, but I am posting this on here so that you guys can do, checks and balances of the math, but it seems right based on what I've known to be true historically. So let's go over here to the computer, and as you can see, I have an Excel spreadsheet open. But first things first, I just want to talk about what I'm using to calculate this math. So everybody should at some point, especially if you road trip or spend a lot of time at Electrify America or whichever charging network you use, you should look up their prices. So that's what I did. So you go to electrifyamerica.com/pricing. It'll show you the pricing for DC fast charging, and it also tells you that it varies by state. You can see here that I just, for some reason, had New Hampshire up. I think it was just a random pick for me. And they're doing per minute fees. But there's a lot of places that don't allow that. And they have to do per kilowatt fees. So, or per kilowatt hour, I should say. So if you go to like South Carolina, here we're per kilowatt hour. And you can see that if you're not the Pass Plus member, this is your new rate. So Electrify America announced a couple weeks ago now that they were raising their rates. And I think this is kind of in tune with what the general industry is going towards. And I think that if you're a Pass Plus member, 36 cents per kilowatt hour is very, very reasonable. In fact, I'd be probably okay with paying, 40 cents maybe, just because, I think there's a balance that has to be struck at DC fast chargers. You have a lot of manufacturers and vehicle manufacturers, that are offering free charging. I know VW is doing that on Electrify America, and you see a lot of VW owners just park their cars for hours on end. They just leave them plugged in at DC fast chargers, and that kind of goes against what the consensus or what the general acceptable use of these chargers, what it's for. When you go to a DC fast charging location, you're meant to get in, get on, get out. Sometimes you have 4, maybe 8 stalls to charge in, and if you're at a busy travel corridor, well, those stalls might be packed up, during peak travel seasons, holidays, weekends, whatever. And I know I by myself, I experienced this in California with my 2020 Premier, I remember going to a DC fast charger and I had to wait, and that shouldn't be the case. And, on top of that, you have ICE vehicles that are icing chargers. They're just using parking spots. There's a lot of ignorance to the EV world still being projected, in that people think that, hey, this is a parking lot, public parking lot, I can park anywhere I want to. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And also, there's a lot of places that don't demark parking spots for EV charging, very well. So it is what it is. I hope that that's something that the companies will look at, updating, looking at how they're handling it. But this video is really not for that discussion. So what I wanted to show you guys is I picked South Carolina here on this website, and you can see that 48 cents per kilowatt hour for guest and past members. So if you pay with a credit card, this is what you're going to pay. I have this, meaning I pay 36 cents per kilowatt hour, plus I pay the $4 monthly fee. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this information, and I'm not going to calculate. This is all rough math. This is not down to the penny. This is just an acceptable, set of formulas that you can use to calculate or budget out per month or per year or whatever, how much you're going to pay for your EV in terms of energy costs. And you can compare that to an ICE vehicle. And in fact, I'll do that here in a second. And again, I hope that my math is all correct. I'm not a math whiz. I lose my head typically when it comes to math. So I rely on Excel and formulas and the calculations that are built in to generate numbers that we can use, something that makes sense. And I hope that I got the formulas correct, because those were obviously input by me. But I'm going to explain it all here, and I'm going to go through, and you guys can look at it, and feel free to tear it apart and, tear me a new one down in the comments. And if I have to do a version 2 of this video, I will certainly do that, because this is one of those things that I feel is very important for potential EV buyers, or, buyers who just purchased an EV. They want to know how much they're gonna spend in a week, in a month, in a year. And these formulas scale. You can start out small. You can even calculate it down to the day. It's relatively easy. And Excel really helps us out too, because if you want to, take an annual projection and, divide it by 365, well, that's your per day cost. It's kind of ridiculous to do that, because I think at some point you start, getting to getting past the point of diminishing returns, because some people don't drive their cars every day. So on those days, you wouldn't be spending any money on energy, but per month you can average out, 4 weeks, figure, 95% of that you might be driving your vehicle. Whatever it is, you can modify it as it goes. And like I said, this is an overcomplicated set of data that I just kind of threw out there, and I thought it would just help illustrate, like I said, to the potential EV buyer or to somebody who just came into the EV world, and essentially just help you figure out the math. Now, if you compare this to like an ICE vehicle, an average sedan that might get 15 miles to the gallon at the current local rates of gasoline, you can also figure out your energy cost per mile. And we're going to look at that here in a second. And I hope, again, apologies if I make a mistake, but I'm putting this out there because, this is all valid. And if I made a mistake, I'll be happy to correct it. So let's get into this. So first things first, we're going to look at the kilowatt hour fee for the Pass Plus membership for the 2 sessions, and this is what we know. In this vehicle, so my 2023 Bolt EUV, we know total miles driven, we know average lifetime efficiency. We also know that there were 2 DC fast charging sessions. We know that there was 1 level 2 charging session that was free. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop that into the overall level 2 charging cost, because sometimes you're going to get free sessions, and that's just going to help you out. That's just going to be the icing on the cake. But other times you're going to have to pay for it. You might end up at a destination like a hotel or something that may have a level 2 charger. They may charge you for the energy at a predetermined rate or whatever. That'll obviously count against you. But if you end up in a park, like for example that recreational facility that I did a video on a few weeks ago now, those are free chargers. They're funded by the municipality. So let's get back to this and let's hit it. So I copied out, and you can see here, I copied out the data from both DC fast charging sessions. You can see here how much I paid, how much energy was delivered, and then, this was the 24th, this was the 25th. It was an identical session, except I used different chargers just to try to mix things up. And you can see that I roughly added the same amount of energy, 77%, 78%. I tried to cut it off right around 80. That's what my cutoff is. And, that's all we really need to know. So we're going to use the total energy delivered numbers, because regardless whether or not the energy went into the pack or not, it was purchased. Therefore, it adds to the cost. For those who don't know, if you own a Bolt EUV, you can actually sit at a fast charger, you can run the air conditioning, you can run the heater, and you can run essentially the vehicle while it's charging. But keep in mind, it's going to slow down your peak charging rates, because whatever overage you're putting into the car, it's going to take away from your charging, charging the pack. So if for example up here you're saying that this charging session here delivered 38.6820 kilowatt hours of energy, there's probably a good chance that maybe only 33 or 34 of that went into the pack, or whatever it translates to. I'm not doing any of that because I'm not discerning whether or not my car was on or not. The second charging session, I can tell you for a fact, the car was not on at all during the session, because my entire family and I went to Chick-fil-A for dinner. And by the time we came out about, an hour or so later, the charging time here said 56 minutes, 35 seconds. So plus minus, I actually caught on camera when the dispenser stopped putting energy into the vehicle. It said charging was completed, and in fact I didn't even get any grace period. You can see here, whereas up here I was recording and we were talking about it while the vehicle was still plugged in, but here I was able to unplug the vehicle right away. So that's all something to kind of keep in mind when you're doing this, because if you want to get really granular and you want to really do yourself justice, you can really get this down to the penny, or even to the fraction of a penny if you go down that many decimal places. I didn't. For me, this was quick, and for me, this was average. If you purchase a brand new EUV or brand new Bolt EV or any electric vehicle, and say you get it with 3, 4, 5 miles on the odometer, from that moment forward, you can actually calculate exactly, every single detail, every single variable. And if you use the third display method, like what I do with the tablet that has the OBD2 dongle that you can read all that information out of the pack, out of the BMS system, out of the computer, everything. You can pull all that stuff out and actually really log all the nitty gritty. So if you're using this for business, I highly recommend that model. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and for some cases it's overkill. You know, you can get away with, you know, calculating averages and getting really close. For example, it's what we did. I didn't track any numbers. So the numbers that we assume here are as follows. We know the 2 DC fast charging sessions. We know the per kilowatt rate that's in my house. And we know that most of the charging is done here. The car is parked outside. It typically is plugged in. Now, the part that I'm not factoring in here is the part where the car draws energy for battery conditioning, like say at night or when it's really cold outside. This whole mathematical formula here is based on the odometer. So this is miles driven, miles consumed, miles driven, energy consumed. So you can easily, you know, in really cold places or really hot places, have the car draw additional energy, you know, from your level 2 or whatever, however you're plugged in, to condition certain parts during certain parts of the year or whatever. And that will be not factored into this. I think at that point you need a smart charger in some ways, like a smart EVSE that will actually via app or whatever log exactly how much energy was delivered during a certain, you know, frame of time. So if you're dealing with per 24 hours or per 30 days or per, you know, week or whatever, then you can pull that data out and factor that in. I don't have that. I have a very basic EVSE. It does tell me certain things like how much energy was delivered, but it resets every time it's plugged in. So if I unplug it, all of that information goes away. If I plug it into the vehicle, then it starts, you know, doing its thing. So there's a lot of things that are not calculated in here. Also, like I mentioned before, the free level 2 charging session that I took in the recreational complex that's here in town, that's also not factored in. Whatever the state of charge was to whatever it finished, I don't have that data. So I have no idea how many miles were added to my vehicle when I charged for that, when I charged, you know, there. The only thing I can say is that is icing on the cake. It's essentially free energy that was delivered into my car. And in some ways, I'm not even sure if it's free because I'm sure there's some taxpayers stuff in it. So I might be paying for a fraction of it or whatever. It is what it is. There's a lot of details and variables that you can kind of spin this web into. But let's just back up and I'll show you what we did here. Okay, so we're looking at the computer again. So we know fast charge session 1, fast charge session 2. I actually copied this data out and I copied this data out. So we're going to go into Excel here and I'm just going to scroll up because I already pre-populated a lot of the stuff. Like I went through and sort of just put this all out here, and this is way overcomplicated. And there's definitely, as I did this, I realized that there's a simpler way to do it, and there might be a template that can be made to where you can actually, you know, create an automated formula-based Excel spreadsheet to keep tabs of your consumption, your energy consumption. So we're going to keep this simple. We're going to look at the lifetime Bolt EUV efficiency is 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour. And I'm going to insert a picture here with what I recorded from the vehicle earlier. And then we know the total mileage on the odometer right now today is 1,060 miles. So using this information, we can also calculate full pack capacity at 66 kilowatt hours, meaning the estimated range on 100% state of charge with this efficiency is about 211.2 miles. That's the best case scenario, right? Again, average. It could be better, it could be worse. It just all depends on temperatures. It depends on how much lead you have in your right foot. It also depends on terrain, on climate control. All of that is in there. And in fact, the Bolt EUV and the Bolt EVs, they do a great job at breaking down your total efficiency in the energy consumption screen. So go ahead and have a look at that if you're really interested. So just to keep things uniform here, my average daily pack capacity is 52.8 kilowatt hours. Now 52.8, that number comes from the 80% that I charge to. So my vehicle at this efficiency level can do 168.96 miles on 80% state of charge. Again, how much lead's in your foot, how you drive, climate, terrain, all of that stuff, techniques. If you skid every time off the line, or if you drive like my mom, sorry mom, no offense, but you're not one to skid your car's off the line like I am. Okay, so that's just kind of an extra set of information that you can use. It doesn't really factor into this equation, but I thought that it would be interesting to just put it there anyway. So 2 DC fast charging session, here's the first one, right? So we know that I paid $12.49 for one of them at the 31-cent mark. So at the time when I charged in Greenville, South Carolina, the fees were still 31 cents. Electrify America has since upped those up by 5 cents. So I should say by 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And I also pay the $4 per month. So you guys know that I'm still in my first month of ownership. In fact, I received the car on February 13th. Today is March 6th. So we're still about a week or so out for the month being taken care of. So, but in these 2 fast charging sessions, I came close at making my money back, the $4 for the Pass Plus. And here you can see how much energy was delivered both sessions, and here's how many estimated miles were gained. Again, this is based on the Bolt EUV's reported efficiency, which could be more, could be less, but this is what we have. Also, I know that my home's utility rate for electricity is 11 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's sometimes average. That's about where you find yourself in certain areas. Some places are more. In California, I paid almost 30 cents per kilowatt hour, and that rate was variable, meaning there were time of use schedules. So between the hours of 4 p.m. and 9 p.m., I had 27 cents, and then the rest of the day I had 30 cents or whatever. And that changed during the year. There was a summer rate, there was a winter rate, and it kind of went back and forth, and you had to literally use the scheduler in the car as to when you wanted it to charge. You programmed in your peak utility rates, and it would then prioritize charging for you to keep the costs as low as possible, which I really like that. And honestly, I'm not even sure if the 2023 has that feature. I don't recall seeing it in the charging little charging app that's in the infotainment system. Something to look for when I go back out into the car. Going back to this, so we know 11 cents per kilowatt hour here at home. I did not count the free level 2 charging session. That's what I mentioned earlier as part of disclosure. We just have to factor that in as icing on the cake. So the total cost of both DC fast charging sessions was $27.28, right? Because we know here's that. You add these two together, you get this. Also, we know about how many estimated miles were gained. So, estimated DC fast charging miles gained, 268.92. What I did was I broke this math down by DC fast charging and level 2, right? So if you take the 1,060 miles on the odometer, you subtract the estimated DC fast charging miles that you gained, right? So you subtract it from 1060, you get 791.08. This number here is the mileage that I charged at home because it's a different rate, right? So it's 11 cents versus 31 cents, right? So that said, my total mileage charged on level 2 at home is 791.08 miles. You take that at 11 cents per kilowatt hour, you're going to get $87.02. So in theory, as of the making of this video, if I were to stop using my vehicle today, my next utility bill will be $87 more, right? Which is nothing if you think about it. You add the cost of DC fast charging to the cost of level 2 charging, and in the 3 weeks that I've had the car, my estimated cost of charging is $114.30. If you divide that per mile average, you get 11 cents of cost per mile to drive the Bolt EUV, the 2023 Bolt EUV. Again, this is my math. Your math might vary, and also your mileage might vary too, because if your technique is, hypermiling, then you're going to get, a much lower per mile cost. You might get 8 cents, you might get 7 cents. I'm not sure if you can get much less than that. I don't know what the math works out to. It also depends on if you live in an area that's relatively flat versus mountains galore. We have hills. We don't have mountains really. We have to drive about an hour to get to the nearest large mountain chain, the Blue Ridge Mountains. So, yeah. Again, average. So $114 to drive my vehicle 1,060 miles. So per mile, if you take 114 plus minus and you divide it by 1,060, you get 11 cents per mile. Now, ironically, that averages out to the same number as my per kilowatt hour rate at my house, which is interesting. And I'm sure if I were to do more DC fast charging sessions, this cost would go up and my cost per mile would go up. So it is highly recommended that you get on board with GM's home charger installation. From what I understand, it's free. I don't know how long that program's gonna last. I opted to not get it just because I figured I already have one. I installed it in my garage, and I thought maybe if I affect the supply chain by taking one of these chargers or whatever, it wouldn't do me any good, and I'd have 2 chargers then in my house, and I don't need that. If I get my wife an EV at some point, if she decides to trade in her RAV4, then we can look at just expanding it, adding a breaker. It's not a big deal. Or we just split the level 2 charger that we have, and she'll charge hers, I'll charge mine, and then we'll do the swapperoo. It's no big deal. I think at that point we'll talk about it and figure it out. Moving on, to calculate the per mile ICE cost based on this same formula. Now, I assumed that, and again, I use Excel formulas. So you can see if I double click here, it kind of tells you what each field is doing. So if the assumption is 15 miles per gallon at an average cost of $3.75 a gallon. Now, there's places that are in the $2 per gallon, but at the same time, there's places in California that are $5, $6, $7 a gallon. So you can see this. So 23 cents per mile cost to drive an ICE vehicle. And this isn't counting any of the odometers or anything like that. This is literally just taking the cost per gallon and dividing it by 15 miles in this case. And you can modify this. So if, for example, you have $5.75 per gallon and your car can do, let's say, 12 miles per gallon because you drive a larger SUV, you can see what your cost per mile just went up to. And this is per mile, right? I should put that there right here, per mile, right? So 48 cents per mile. At the same time, I am cruising around at around 11 cents per mile. So you're talking about, my costs being somewhere around 20%. Now, obviously, you can modify this to, make it look like my car is, 1% of a total ICE vehicle cost. But realistically, if we just go back to what it was, 15 miles per gallon at $3.75 per gallon, you can see that it's about 25 cents per mile cost. Now, just looking at that, my car is, more than half of the per mile cost. So less than half, I guess, if you look at it this way, right? Because if it only costs me 11 cents, and I use the 15 mile per gallon assumption because that's what, most vehicles that are roughly the same size and weight to the EUV, that's probably the miles per gallon I'm assuming they would get. Some might have larger engines, some might have smaller engines, but you guys know the Bolt EUV is pretty heavy because it is slightly larger than the Bolt EV, and of course the battery pack weighs quite a bit. So, but this isn't really taking into account any of that stuff. This is just looking at miles per gallon average. So if your car gets 20 or 10, some cars get 8. It just depends on, what kind of vehicle it is and how you drive it. I can take my wife's RAV4 and get 7 miles to the gallon. I mean it. I've done it. We drove across the country averaging about 15 to 19 miles to the gallon, and that was with me driving pretty much cruise control most of the way, 75, 80 mile per hour speeds depending on the legs of the road. It was the middle of June, so it was hot. We were running climate control, and we spent, several $100s just on that trip. And we went, there was a gas station west of the Arizona border, still in California, that was $7.87 per gallon. So, you can do the math. It just depends on where you live, how you drive. And like I said, this spreadsheet is overkill for anything. In fact, I think there's an app that'll track this for you. Like Gas Buddy used to. If you're an ICE owner, you should really look at Gas Buddy. It's a really, really interesting app for logging mileage and, keeping your sanity with how much, fuel you consume. Also, where you go. I think that app will still tell you where the lowest price is in terms of gasoline in your area. So yeah, I think that pretty much closes this video out. I can't think of anything else. I think it's quite eye-opening for me to know that, 3 weeks of ownership have only cost me $114. I can tell you for a fact that driving 5 days across the country cost me well over $600 to drive an ICE vehicle, my wife's ICE vehicle specifically. So that's pretty much all I can say. And I did that trip in 5 days, and this is 3 weeks of ownership. So you are roughly talking about 20% the cost, 25% the cost, depending on the EV, depending on your driving style, and depending on how you charge. If you charge at home, you're going to save, a lot of money. Saving 20 cents per kilowatt hour is not something to sneeze at, because it adds up. This is all cumulative. If you add another zero to the odometer or any of these formulas here, you can easily see your cost of charging just going through the roof. And I will tell you this. Some people say, yeah, but electric vehicles are so expensive, yada, yada, yada. No, that's not true. They don't have to be expensive. Let me just put it to you like that. You can get used EVs that still have decent capacity on the battery. They might be a few years old, maybe 3, 4, 5 years old. You can also get one that's 10 years old if you're looking at one of the earlier Teslas, or if you're looking at a Nissan Leaf from 10 years ago or whatever. If you're just commuting around town, if you're using it as a daily bomber to get from your house to a store, or maybe to Walmart or something, then that car will suffice, right? If you're doing long distance trips and you need a car that's 100%, pretty much consistent, then you got to look at a new one, right? But that's a choice that you have to make. That's something that every situation is going to be affected by, and everybody's is going to be different. What my situation is might not be what your situation is. You might want an $80,000 Tesla to drive to work every day, and that's it. Or you might want a $40,000 Bolt EV to drive 1,000 miles every weekend, right? There's plenty of guys and girls on YouTube who do both. There's several channels that we follow. I'm very interested in that. You can see, a guy in his Bolt EV doing 500-mile trips at a time. And that to me is eye-opening, because he'll show you what, the charging stops are like, and it's a Bolt EV, right? So that it's going to max out at 55, kilowatt, the charging rate, right? So, and then of course you have the other side of the coin where, Teslas or some of the, Rivians and other, the Kias, the Hyundais, the Mach-E's of the world. And, of course, then you have the Rivians with the larger trucks, the larger batteries and stuff like that. That's a choice, man. That's a choice that you have to make. And ultimately that will be what determines your per mile cost of ownership, because you can hypermile those things. You can hypermile any vehicle, right? You can hypermile an ICE vehicle. If you're rolling downhill, you can easily pop that thing into neutral and just let it roll. You can do the same thing with a Tesla. You can do the same thing with a Bolt EV or EUV or anything like that to hypermile it. Or you can drive super slow. You can keep like the 55 mile per hour speeds. It really is that simple. And, looking back at the spreadsheet, I think that I am more than proud to be an EV owner. Having not had my EV for 9 months really, really hurt. Not just financially, but just mentally too, And now that we've got that all cleared up, this is definitely nice to see, because I'm going to get my first utility bill here in the next, I don't know, where are we at? It's March 6th. I should be getting it this week for February. So I should get 2 weeks of February, and then March will be my first electric bill. And then we can compare that to previous electric bills Even though, I mean, the seasons change, so we're cooling more, we're heating less, and or vice versa for earlier on. So it'll be a hard comparison, but maybe every once in a while I can do these costs, maybe at 2,000 miles or at 3 months of ownership or 6 months or whatever. We can make a video like this to just circle back and see what's what, in other words. And maybe I'll just save the spreadsheet. I actually saved it already just in case I, did something and lost it. So I have it saved, but I'll put a date stamp on it, and we'll revisit this at some point and see if it still stands or if it's worse or if it's better. The more road trips I do in the future, that'll probably affect the per mile cost. It'll probably go up a little bit, but I'm not expecting it to go up more than 3 to 5 cents on average. And I think the same thing goes for an ICE. If you drive it a lot, your cost per mile is going to go up because you're going to end up going uphill, downhill, or you're going to be in traffic, or you're going to be driving 80 miles per hour and you're going to be burning fuel. Also, winter fuel versus summer fuel, those blends actually affect your ranges too in ICE vehicles. So that's something to also keep in the back of your head. There's a lot. This was overload in some ways, but I hope that you can use this information to create your own little chart of, estimated costs of charging. I hope it works out for you. If you have any questions, go down below, leave me your thoughts as always, and we'll revisit this, like I said, in a few months. Maybe I don't know. We'll figure out a nice interval, and we'll put it on the books to revisit. So, in the meantime, I appreciate all of you, and as always, thank you so much for watching. And until the next time, bye-bye.